Hello, and welcome to the fourth myth in our series of 6 myths of field force planning. Today, we're going to look at the idea that salespeople know how to get around their territory best. And again, this is one of the most common things we've heard during our time helping people sort out their field forces. So, a lot of people say, well, how difficult can it be to sort out journey plans for a salesperson? It's just about taking a few calls and putting them in the right order across a few days. Well, if we look at a very simple example of where you ask a salesperson to take 10 calls for just one day and put them in the right order, there are actually over 3.6 million different ways they can put those calls in the right order. So again, even for a very simplistic solution, we're asking our salespeople to do a lot. And that is when we haven't even factored into things like where are all the calls located? What about the drive times right down to street level for those call locations and right across their territory? What about the fact that some calls require multiple visits within a cycle and some only a single visit? Again, adding more and more complexity all the time. Some calls can only happen at certain times on certain days. Again, it's not just as simple as just picking 10 calls in one day and choosing the right order. We might want to build in overnight stops where it's sensible, where someone is a long way away from home and there's still quite a bit of work to do. Salespeople aren't on the road every day. We also need to factor into when people are off the road and build territories that reflect that, and build journey plans that reflect that too. And we have to do this not just for one day, but for every single day of the call cycle. The permutations are huge. A salesperson can't possibly get it right. It'll probably take them a long time to make an attempt, and it'll also mean they do far more driving as necessary when they get round to working the journey plan. When they do try and create journey plans themselves, there are a number of approaches which often take place in the field. For example, this example in Poland, some people might say, well, let's work on a postcode basis, so all calls that get called on in a certain postcode get called on at the same time. Well, as we can see from this example, this green postcode is a very strange shape. To actually do all those calls on the same day and ignore the other postcodes around it would be nonsensical. There are actually far more sensible clusters to be made which break down postcode boundaries. So it's a very simple thing to do to just use postcodes, but again, not sensible and not efficient when it comes down to the reality. Again, what people will often do is cluster calls together that are close to each other. Now in this example, we have 2 calls together at the top that are very close to each other, but there's a divide. In this case, it's a river, but it could just be a poor road network. That means, although these accounts appear to be very close together, in terms of the reality of travelling between them, it's actually a very significant journey and would be silly to put those calls together. Again, it's not just about putting calls that are close together with each other either. This map here is just showing that certain calls have to happen on certain days. So again, it's not just a case of throwing a few calls together that are in some way near each other, but do the patterns of when those calls need to be made make sense too. And what often happens is we end up with a situation where what we wanted in terms of a management team to achieve in terms of frequencies shown by these red boxes actually do not match with what actually happens when a salesperson plans themselves. So the blue boxes here are showing exactly what happened for a particular plan. The yellow square is a person's home base, and what we often find is that calls close to a person's home base get overcalled and those far away get undercalled. So all those additional extra calls we do to those calls close to home don't actually add any additional business, and those ones where we're not calling on the people that are further away may well be getting taken over by our competitors because of our lack of interest and coverage of them. So, rather than asking a salesperson to spend days each cycle doing their own journey planning or routing, with our solution, with an automatic optimization, you actually turn that day spent planning into days spent selling. We also ensure that there is no longer a discrepancy between the corporate management goals and those of the individual salesperson. Frequencies that we plan to hit actually do get hit. With a manual approach, again, because there's always more driving than is necessary, call rates and obviously the revenues that are derived from those calls will be way lower than is actually possible. And conversely, mileage bills are generally about 25% higher than they would be if they were optimized. So the reality is not that a salesperson knows their patch, but they actually need guidance to get around their territory in an efficient manner. Thank you for listening.